So last time I wanted to talk a little bit about the GOP debate and my thoughts on that, because I watched it live on Wednesday, like the primary debate. But my thoughts were, I think, very poorly organized. So I took the liberty of putting together some notes in the text document in it, where I like write down things I want to talk about on stream. Oh, oops. And so I'll be talking about that today, the GOP debate, even though that's, in the scale of politics, that's kind of old news at this point. But I think the implications of it are still fresh enough to be relevant, right? So starting on that trail of analysis, the only consistent through line throughout the whole debate was the inconsistency. Like, everybody had like discordant answers, it seemed like. It was just like ideological flailing. They were sort of oscillating between neoconservatism and fascism to such an extent that I couldn't really gauge whether or not they had fully decided on the Republican field there, whether they wanted to be like one or the other. So that was one notable part. They sort of, they really backpedaled on a couple of issues. The being like climate and abortion. Those were topics of discussion during the debate because they constitute very relevant political discussion among policymakers, particularly. You know, Ramaswamy got booed for saying that climate change was a hoax, and people were not getting very positive responses for saying that abortion should be banned nationally either. You know, I think the Republican Party is realizing that these are not winning issues for them. So, on top of that, it seemed like no candidate could really commit to like a hard stance on anything. You know, they weren't okay. The Republican candidates, it seemed like in the debate there, like didn't want to abandon the old rhetoric because of the like success that it had brought them in previous election cycles. But like at the same time, they knew that they couldn't double down on it because people really don't like that sort of thing anymore with the rhetoric surrounding tax cuts, climate, abortion, whatever. So it led to them like having a bunch of kind of word salad moments, you know, where it just seemed like even in the primary debates there is still sort of the expectation that nothing really means anything, but it seemed like the candidates didn't really understand what they themselves wanted to convey to the audience. They were trying to sort of straddle the line in such a way that it was like they didn't quite know what their platform was. Oh my god. That was a crazy knee and an even crazier lag spike. Going back to the Republican debate, there were a couple of very weird, like, departures from the old rhetoric as well. Nikki Haley, for example, like, came out fully in support of access to contraception, something which the GOP is known to oppose usually. And the sort of the rhetoric on abortion shifted to, well, we overturned Roe, and that's our success, and we should leave it there. And this is in an environment where you should, like, under other circumstances, I would expect them to be more comfortable with being extremists because it's a friendly crowd, right? Ah, dang it. But, you know, the crowd cheered when Nikki Haley said that we should support access to birth control, because I guess Wow. Air still just knocked down at 40%. That's kind of crazy. And like I mentioned earlier, Vivek Ramaswamy got booed, not just booed, but like unambiguously so, for saying that climate change was a hoax. Which means that, like, clearly the Republicans can't really do that whole shtick anymore. But simultaneously, they can't just become, like, pro-climate Andes, like the left, because they rely on, like, fossil fuel companies for part of their, like, policy platform and whatever. Foreign policy in the debate was also really weird, a really weird topic, because people were saying, like, people were saying all sorts of stuff. It was, like, all over the place, like I said earlier, with that sort of ideological flailing and inconsistency, right? On Ukraine, there was, like, every position in the world taken. They were clearly not very coherent on that front. And then with border policy and stuff, you know, that's a big issue for Republicans. They love that sort of thing. They had feverish answers about, like, invading Mexico, which is a sovereign country and also our ally, like an ally to the United States. You know, even somebody who doesn't really care, like, about like nationalism or anything, realizes that is a just clownish idea, you know. I think I'm getting some rollbacks with this guy. I saw a little one just there. I live? Let's go. And then for me, the most insane policy position, because I'd even heard about, like, the like, invade Mexico talking point. Like, that wasn't entirely new to me. It's still very, like, weird and kind of crazy. But it wasn't exactly novel. The craziest thing out of the bunch, for me, was when they started talking about government agencies and departments, whereupon it was like, it's now a mainstream position in the Republican Party to get rid of things like the Department of Education. They just said, like, flat out, the candidates were saying, like, yeah, we should abolish the Department of Education, which is wild. Apparently, my dad has told me, he has knowledge of politics going a lot further back than myself, specifically regarding the Department of Education. That's been a mainstream policy of Republicans since the 1980s, since the Reagan days. In fact, he made that position popular. But they weren't just saying it about the Department of Education and stuff. They said it for some crazy shit, like the FDA. Like, somebody said that they want to get rid of the Food and Drug Administration and like, I think the Department of Health and Human Services or something. And I was like, wow, these guys, you know, not only are they insane, I think that also signifies that they're clearly not serious about becoming candidates, like, winning the actual primary elections. Because, like, let's be real, none of them have a shot, right? You know, Trump is still by far and away the favorite in the GOP primaries. And the reason I say that none of them have a chance against Trump, and why that's, like, this debate isn't really about that, is because there was a question posed during the debate about if Trump is the eventual nominee, right? If he wins the primaries, will you support him? You know, like, show of hands. And every single candidate up there raised their hand, right? Ultimately, I think what this debate was about, right? In addition to, like, getting on Trump's vice president spot, I think this debate was about the GOP trying to see what its platform is going to be and what policies they're going to advertise themselves on. You know? And I think it failed massively. And this is this goes to support what I said in the other video that I made about the GOP, which is that they are grasping at straws. They're desperate. They really, functionally speaking, they don't really have a platform. You know? Like what? Invade Mexico? That's not a real policy position that you can run for election on. You're gonna... And that's, like, not actionable either. You know, so many of the things that is on... that are on their, like, platform or whatever are either, like, old news and people don't like, or they're just insane and infeasible. You know? Oops. And ultimately, that's why I think... That's why I say stuff like the GOP's on its last legs, because I have seen recently a large amount of evidence to show that the GOP doesn't have a whole lot of steam left, that their days are ultimately going to be, you know, numbered. And I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that the GOP has any sort of major staying power as far as, like, their platform is concerned, as far as their ability to attract people to their party, as far as their ability to, like, actually finance their party and things like that. You know, but yeah, and for me as well, it's kind of hard to find politics stuff that's been happening in the past, like, couple of days, because I stream every other day. Granted, that doesn't mean I have like, I ever really run out of things to talk about. There's always, like, some small thing that I can kind of pull out of my sleeve and whatever. Okay. But, you know, sometimes there is the issue of, like, things getting repetitive, as it were. Like, I can only say that Republicans are evil demons that want to kill us all so many times before it, like, gets old and whatever. But I can sort of analyze the reason that they do the things that they do beyond just being, like, well, uncaring, callous human beings, right? Feel like American politics have been pretty boring these days. Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff has slowed down, but, you know, there's been, I think there's been, like, a couple big, like, really big things of interest. And for me, one of those is actually having to do with the Republican Party. You know, sometimes it takes some looking to find good politics. You know, I was just talking about, I think the GOP is actually on its last legs because of that exact fact. You know, the GOP is only really interested in talking about trans people. But the problem is, even their base is, like, getting tired of it. GG's, Lamb. You know? You can poll the average conservative voter, and a lot of them will be okay with trans people existing and think that whole narrative is overblown. You know? And as I saw in the debate, I actually watched the GOP debate because I'm a glutton for politics. It seemed like the GOP just can't find its footing anymore. You know, the whole purpose of that debate, at least from where I stand, it seemed like the purpose of that debate was to be like, okay, we need to do, like, a party reset. We need to kind of figure out what is our policy footing. And they couldn't do it. They really just could not do it, you know? There was so much, there was, like, baggage that they weren't willing to get rid of. There was baggage that they had to get rid of that kind of defined their party for the longest time. You know? stuff like abortion, they're now, the GOP has started to backpedal a little bit on abortion because they realize how much it's losing them. Even if they genuinely believe those positions, they have to like square that with the fact that it's not politically feasible because people hate that idea and it's a terrible idea. Same thing with trans people. They didn't talk about trans people that much on the debate stage because I think they realized that the well for hysteria has actually run dry. And I think it's actually for that reason that politics has slowed down a bit. You know, in the US, it has historically, well, I don't want to say historically because that means very different things depending on if you're talking to like an American or a European or whatever. But like for the past, like ever since Reagan, the GOP have really been the ones dominating the narrative and sort of driving the political discourse. You know, because the Democrats don't really do that. They don't have ideologues in their party the way that Republicans do. As eating itself alive, but conservatives are pretty split these days. Yeah, funnily enough, the left in America, in terms of policy making and politics, the left in America is as unified as I've ever seen it, right? Even with, there are some people on the fringes advocating for people to like vote for Green Party and things like that, which I don't think is a good idea just from electoral strategy perspective. But it seems like there's a pretty good consensus on what the platform is right now, and that like it's a good platform. Who are you talking to? I am talking to, well, chat, but also nobody in particular. You know, and it seems like with the issue of like school lunches and student debt, even though the institutional like components of the left in like within the Democratic Party are pretty tepid and unwilling to push the envelope, it seems like the broader left is in agreement that, you know, these things are the center of conversation. You ever debate while playing? I bet that would be so difficult. This is a fun story. I don't always stream Melee. I did do a debate one time with a chatter while playing Minecraft. I was out exploring and stuff, and they came in and started to debate me about socialism and market cooperatives. They were a weird hodgepodge of like anti-socialism but pro-Leninism. And I'll be honest, I kind of whooped them in the debate because I've read stuff about market cooperatives. I kind of know how they work and how they function relative to what are known as traditional firms, you know, businesses where there's like a set hierarchy and stuff. So there have been mixed results. You know, all my debates on stream haven't gone that well, but I have tried to debate while streaming, both successfully and unsuccessfully. It's difficult. But ultimately, I think it is a tremendously useful skill set to have. So yeah, I really think that in the United States, we are kind of in the heat of an unprecedented political moment, at least within, like, most of the lifetimes of the people who are alive right now, you know? We always read in American textbooks that, like, there used to be the Democratic Republican Party, and there used to also be the Whig Party and the Federalist Party and all that, and then eventually those parties went away. I think we're actually witnessing a Republican Party that is about to go away, you know? From the perspective of, like, a lacking policy platform, but also from the perspective of, like, lacking party finances and you know, all that. They just don't have anything going for them, really. And combine that with recently an unprecedentedly good move from the Democrats to make, like, universal school lunches and stuff part of their platform. You know? I saw, it could be, yeah, and I want to be optimistic, although I don't know, something could happen that I haven't really accounted for, and that's also possible. But, you know, we've seen what happens when the Democrats pick pretty unambiguously good policy to argue on, and then the Republicans try to argue against it. Like in where was it, Minnesota? That the Republicans tried to argue against the concept of universal like free school lunches. And he was like, oh, well, all I had for breakfast was a cereal bar. I guess that means I'm hungry now. And like argue against the concept of like food insecurity or something. And it makes them look really bad. And so I think that's going to be that might be the light at the end of the tunnel for the Democrats, is realizing, hey, wait, if we just advocate for good things, then the Republican Party can never beat us and things like that. You know, obviously I have no shortage of problems with the Democratic Party, because they are, at the end of the day, it's in theory a like big tent political party, but it's full of like neoliberals and people whose ambitions are way too milquetoast and way too well, unambitious. Oh well, you probably get where I'm coming from. I feel like the GOP has been on its last leg for a while, but now Trump has them fighting pretty hard. Yeah, and I think that's ultimately what's going to do them in, is because Trump represents like a massive, he's a massive central figurehead and personality for the GOP, right? Every party needs this, whether they recognize it or not. And I think the Democrats don't yet fully recognize this. Your party needs a charismatic and prominently featured figure to draw people in that aren't that invested otherwise. And Trump represented that in some ways for the Republican Party. You know, this hyper charismatic, you know, sleazy business guy who could talk to you maybe like you were an idiot, but like he was also an idiot and like didn't care much for the like snot-nosed billionaires. He used that to basically, since he's a narcissist, he used that to basically reshape the entire Republican Party around himself, largely in the form of the Republican base, right? But also in the form of the party finances. You know, in reshaping the Republican base around himself, he also reshaped the party's finances around himself. So now a lot of the money coming from Republican, like, small dollar donors goes to Trump instead of the Republican Party. But he was so charismatic and such a attractive force for the GOP that they, like, basically threw longevity under the bus for, like, short-term successes. And he ended up also enabling some of the worst tendencies of the far right in the GOP as well. And oddly enough, the GOP has now gone so far right that Trump represents an obstacle to fascism rather than a catalyst for it. You know? Ah, I should have checked that. Do you think Trump will even get nominated? Yes. In fact, I think it's basically inevitable that Trump will be the Republican nominee because of how the debates went, right? Right now, the GOP is stuck in a trap, right? And all of the candidates on the debate stage on Wednesday night experienced this. If you're anti-Trump, you get booed by the crowd. In fact, Chris Christie said something like overtly anti-Trump, and he got booed for so long, the moderators had to physically turn around and tell the crowd to shut up so he could finish speaking, right? That's option one. Option two is you do what Vivek Ramaswamy did, and you be pro-Trump, in which case the crowd likes you, but then why wouldn't they just support Trump, you know? And that's sort of what I mean by they've, like, allowed Trump to embed himself in the party for the sake of their short-term successes in a way that has harmed the party's, like, ability to be an actual force in politics. Because Trump is kind of, like, toxic to anybody that isn't already a supporter of his. I don't think anyone else is good enough, but the indictment is pretty bad. Yeah, it is you know, it is a really bad look for the GOP. Funnily enough, within the GOP, support for Trump has increased following the indictment. But, you know, like I said, this is toxic to the rest of the like voter base and whatever who aren't registered Republicans or whatever. So almost certainly what's going to happen is Trump is going to win the Republican nomination, but then lose the general election and will most likely get 4 more years of Joe Biden as president, unless he keels over at some point and then we get Kamala Harris, who is almost undoubtedly going to run in 2028, unfortunately. You know, just because the GOP, I think, is done doesn't mean that the Democratic Party is going to have this massive turnaround, but it will return the state of politics to the right kind of circumstances where somebody like Bernie Sanders or a similarly minded progressive can really shine, and that is when there's like no immediate threat to democracy as like a concept, you know. Oh no, what'd you do that for? I get the feeling it might have been an accident. I crouch canceled that? Let's go. Let me live! No way. Oh shit. This is the nuttiest Yoshi story game. No, I'm dead. I hope the real conflict in the future will be Democrats versus far left, rather than how it is now, but I don't really know who we get there, how we get there in practice. Yeah, and I think that is eventually what politics is going to do. You know, over the past several decades, politics has gradually shifted to the left, ever since the end of the Cold War, right? Because, you know, obviously even in the early 2000s, socialism was like a dirty word. And now I see it a lot of times in like mainstream political conversation, you know, as like a real thing and not just like some straw man from the Republican side, you know? And I think that's going to keep happening over time, especially as like the Cold War gets further and further behind us, and people stop like immediately thinking of like McCarthyist rhetoric and like whatever. Although obviously I'm no fan of the Soviet Union, I would argue that if they were, like, if you could argue successfully that they were socialist, I would argue they were not good, like, at all at being socialist, and I would contend that they weren't even socialists. But yeah, it's going to be a slow process, I think, is what I want to sort of settle on there. Like, however we get there, it'll be relatively slow. I might see it at some point in my adult life. I might see the normalization of socialism in mainstream politics, on the policy stage in America. In fact, we're kind of seeing it right now. Maybe not in name, but certainly in terms of like what policies are being supported. I think in our lifetime. Yeah, and you know, this is something I've given a lot of thought to, because I'm like full-on anarcho-communist. You know, my political aspirations are way out there given the current political climate. You know, and I don't think anything like that is ultimately feasible in our lifetimes, right? But it is possible that maybe we get some version of, like, market socialism. You know, one of the reformist visions for a social democratic or socialist world in our lifetime. And in order to do that, as weird as it sounds, it, like, there has to be a degree of, like, the opposite of political unrest. Things have to be stable enough for liberalism now to be under, like, the magnifying glass, rather than for it to be like a refuge against fascism. I think the best we get is socialized healthcare and maybe free housing in our lifetime. Yeah, that's definitely possible. Yeah, I think, okay, here's my take. I think one thing that we're definitely going to get it at some point in my lifetime is actually free higher education. You know, socialized healthcare and housing are definitely also fair bets for that policy discussion. But I think free education is closer around the corner, because what's happening right now in America is student loan debt is like paused right now. People who ordinarily have like federal student loans and whatever to pay back, right now they don't have to pay anything back. It's sort of a stabilizing measure for coronavirus. But once September comes around, or at least way cheaper. Oh yeah, one of the two. Once September comes around, that's going to be unpaused. They're going to have to start paying stuff back again. And that's going to create a lot of political discontent. You know, people are going to do actually a debt strike. I saw some news reporting on this that like people were planning to just not pay their student loans back once they get unpaused. Enough such that like if the Biden administration decided to try to crack down on them, it would be like, what do? Arrest tens of millions of Americans? You know, good luck with that. And I think that's going to at least force a debt cancellation. And it might even force a conversation about free college, which would be cool. College is ridiculous right now. Yeah, it really is, you know.